Okay, we're rolling. Lights good. All right, everyone. Welcome back to your REO Mastery training as part of the REO University. My name is Ben Barber, and I'm going to take you through what I think is an incredibly important part of this REO puzzle, understanding and working with KPIs. Okay. Now, we're going to go into the definition of KPIs, so don't worry. I'm going to give you everything you need on this. But why I think it is so important is because KPIs are used to measure performance. And they're not just used to measure your performance, they're used to measure the asset manager's performance and to measure the operations or the outsourcer performance for their client. Okay, so once you understand what's being monitored, what's being scored and judged and measured, then you can use this as an advantage and actually start tracking your own performance. Okay, so we're going to walk through these. If you have any questions, hit me up on the side and let's go through them. Like if you're running into specific issues with KPIs with a specific outsourcer, I want to see it. What I'm going to do is give you a general overview of what the typical KPIs are, and then we're going to look at one outsourcer very specifically. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. So KPIs first. What is a KPI? Stands for a key performance indicator. Okay, and like we said, they're just used to measure performance. Now, a couple things to keep in mind is that there's going to be different types. Okay, and we'll go through the different types, but understanding that this is kind of like on a different axle here, because this first one here is simple, but it's also one that is subjective, right? So this one is simple and subjective, like the asset manager just rating their experience with you once a transaction's done. So if they come and they're like, hey, Ben was kind of a jerk through the whole thing, you're going to get a bad score, but there's no way to quantify that, right? Like there's no way for them to support that because it's just a feeling. But again, it's a very simple key performance indicator. Was the agent easy to work with, right? Simple, but subjective. Now, on the other side, they can be very complicated. Right? Now, this example that I have here, this is saying a net recovery, which is one of the biggest ones, which is basically, this is a standard example that I put in here. Sales price minus the total of any seller paid concessions plus any costs. And there are some outsourcers that will include commissions, title insurance, repairs, anything like that. They'll consider anything that's paid on the final HUD, right? So if you're paying taxes or HOA dues on the HUD, that would go into the costs. So they're going to say whatever our sales price is, so $100,000 sales price minus the concessions and the costs divided by the original as is value is going to be our KPI. So let's do a little example on the board here and hopefully we can see. Okay, so if I'm at $100,000 as my sales price, I'll call that my SP, $100,000 sale price, okay? Now I'm going to take my concessions. So let's say I gave up, I don't know, let's say I paid $2,500. And to be simple, let's say all my other costs were $2,500. Okay? So now I've got a $100,000 sale price minus $5,000. Should probably turn my phone to silent. Sorry about that. So $100,000 sale price minus $5,000 concessions. I'll just put those as a C. Is going to equal, make sure we can see this here, $95,000, okay? And then we're just going to say we're going to divide that by our original as is value, and let's say I originally said it was worth $100,000. And that's my, my original value. So my net recovery equals 95%. Okay? Does that make sense? So it's just $100,000 sale price minus my seller closing costs, concessions, plus my fees. So $5,000 total gives me a $9,500 basically net price that I'm coming away with. And then divide that by my original value. $100,000 gives me a 95% net X. And you're going to see how that works when we get a little deeper in here and we actually go over one of the scorecards. Okay. All right. Boom. Okay, so again, and I know I went over this during the introduction, but I just want to reiterate, why do we need to know about the KPIs? Well, the number one thing is because this is how success and failure is measured in the REO world. Okay, like we can have a really good feeling, and I've seen this before. We've had outsourcers who have been the king of the hill, and let's say you have this big, huge bank, World Bank, that comes out, and they only have one outsourcer. Typically, if there's one, they're not measuring performance, so that it's just going off of feeling, and it says, yeah, we're recovering what we want to. Everybody feels good. Everybody's got good feelings about this. But the minute you bring a second outsourcer into the mix, now how do you compare the two? And the only way you can compare the two is to have specific sets of measurement. Now, again, they could be subjective, like we talked about, or they can be measurable, like we just did an example of, right? But that is how success and failure are measured in the REO world. We're going to establish goal KPIs, the client is, and then the outsourcer is going to report back their results, and they're either going to get them, they're going to meet their KPIs, exceed their KPIs, or they're going to fall short, and then that's going to be an indicator of performance for the client, okay? So client-specific KPIs are used to compare outsourcers against each other, and I'm going to show you what that means. So like if you've ever heard the term champion challenge, it's basically just a nice way of saying, hey, we're just going to compare everybody and make sure that everybody's performing, and we're not going to do it as just a feel, right? We're going to actually do it, and we're going to stack column A, B, C, and D, and we're going to see how the outsourcers perform against each other. So let me give you an example of that. So in this example here, you can see I just put up 3 different asset management companies. So I have VRM, Green River Capital, and then I have Phoenix Asset Management here, okay? Now, these aren't real numbers. I just popped these in just as a way to show a comparison, but I wanted to show you how a champion challenge would look. That they would walk in, they'd look at turn rate. So turn rate would be available assets at the very beginning of the month divided by the amount. It would basically be whatever went under contract at the end of the month or whatever closed, depending on how the outsourcer is looking at it, divided by what they start the month at, okay? So again, make sure you can see that. If I go turn rate, my turn rate here, and for simplicity, I start the month at 100 assets. At the end of the month, I close 25 closed. I'll put this as my start. Available. I started with 100. I closed 25. 25 divided by 100, 25%. So my turn rate was 25%. Make sense? And again, that's an example, right? That's just how they look at it. And they're going to measure different ways depending on which outsourcer you're going with. I just want you to be aware that these are ways that things are measured, okay? So in this example, I just put the KPI here, turn rate, average days in inventory, that's a DII, and you'll get used to all of these acronyms, but days in inventory is DII. Net X, also known as net recovery. So VRM, Green River, Phoenix, and you can see them stacked up right against each other, okay? Now, like we said, there's 2 different types of KPIs. The very first one is something that's measurable, something that is the math, right? And we always say the path is the math, and there's no way to fluff these numbers. It's not subjective. It's a very measurable time, like when did the asset go on the market to when did we receive our first offer. That's not subjective. That's a timeline, okay? So measurable KPI would involve specific measurable results. And then, of course, you're going to have your subjective KPIs that are going to include feedback and just really other subjective items, like we said, like how difficult, well, not how that preassumes that you were difficult or presupposes. So a subjective KPI would be rate your experience with the listing agent from a 1 to 10, and the asset manager would fill that out, okay? The listing agent was knowledgeable, yes or no. The listing agent had good communication skills would be another subjective KPI. But if they actually said the listing agent completed their tasks on time, now that's measurable, okay? It's harder, total side note, it's harder for you to dispute anything that is measurable because, again, everybody's set up to that same standard. So if you say, well, my days in eviction are long because your eviction attorney sucks and they can't get anything out to me, right? Okay, well, that's going to be reflected in every other agent that's working in that same area that's had an asset go through eviction, all right? Unless they're using a bunch of different eviction attorneys. What you can argue is something that's subjective. Like if the asset manager says, hey, this agent was just a prick, very hard to work with, That's incredibly subjective, okay? Unless they have documented issues of noncompliance, that's something that you could argue and argue well. And I would argue it on that, all right? So here's some examples of some measurable KPIs. And I know we did an example on my slanted whiteboard, but examples of KPIs, some of the biggest ones, days in inventory. Like how long has the outsourcer had that property? Days on market, okay, DOM. Days on market is going to basically be how long have we been listed? How long have we been on the market? When did we first hit the market listed, okay? Days in escrow, it's funny because these are the exact same. Days in escrow, DIE, and days in eviction, DIE. So you're going to have some different acronyms for each one. Self-explanatory though. After the contract was executed, how long are you in escrow? Days in status, and that's going to measure each specific status. And then aged percentage, what percentage of the portfolio is aged. And then net recovery or net X like we just went through. So I wanted to give you this slide to give you, now again, these are just generic calculations. Some outsourcers are going to do it different. So your homework is to understand what your assets, understand what your outsourcers are using as that measurement. Like what's the start point for days in inventory, right? Does that run current? Does it run to when it's closed? Does it run to when it's off the books? When it goes under contract? Like what are their measurement? What's that criteria? Because once you know that, you can start measuring your own performance, and that's not only going to help you make sure that you're staying on track and you're getting, like you're always performing at the top of the chain, right? But it's also going to help you if you have to dispute something. Like if you think you're tracking at 100% performance and they send out your scorecard and your scorecard says you suck, you're 50%, you'll be able to go back and look at it line by line and say, well, here's what I'm tracking. What are you tracking, right? And it's going to show them really that you're on your shit and that you take your business serious, which you should. If you're going to dominate this space, you need to take it serious. And it's going to give you something measurable that you can go back and combat their results with, okay? Totally off topic there. Sorry about that. That's going to happen constantly, so I hope you get used to it. But let me just run through these. So these are typical. Again, they're not everybody's, but these are typically the measurements, okay? DII, days in inventory, is going to be from the foreclosure date to the current date, or if the asset was reassigned to the asset company, which happens a lot, like they move their portfolios a lot, it's the day that asset was received, okay? So if the eviction date was January 1st, that's when my start date's going to be. Or if I receive the asset March 1st as an outsourcer, like if VRM got the asset March 1st and it was already out of eviction, then the starting date's going to be March 1st. So it's just how many days from today's date to that date. That's days in inventory. Days on market is typically the initial list date to the current date. And days on market is going to run, usually it's going to run while an asset's under contract, okay? Days on market is going to start, think of it just like days on market with your MLS, right? Like it starts once an asset hits the market. I guess your MLS is a little different. So maybe for the MLS, you'd have to look at it as CDOM, your combined days on market. Most outsourcers won't stop it once it goes pending or once it goes under contract. They're going to keep running that all the way to closing. All right. Some might not, but the majority will. All right. So it's a little different than what I said with your MLS. So sorry. Days in escrow. Days in escrow is a big one. Date that the offer, so they could do a couple things. Date that the offer was accepted to the current date and then eventually to the close date so that you have historic numbers. Or they could say days in escrow starts once that contract is executed, because you'll see this when we go through the task module, that contracts get rejected 70% of the time, right? Now, not for you, because we're going to train you how to do it right so that you stand out, but 70% of the time contracts are rejected. So outsourcers may go off the date that the offer was accepted. They may go off of the date that the contract was officially executed. Okay, so again, understand your own KPIs. Days in status. Now, days in status is a good one so that the outsourcers can look for bottlenecks, right? So they're going to say, I want to see a days in status for each process. So eviction, initial services, valuation, awaiting market strategy, listed, in escrow. I guess those are the main ones, but that's what they're looking for, right? Like in each status so that they can see, like if I'm looking at this as a whole, and here's my REO timeline, and my KPI for days in inventory, let's say I want less than 180 days, right? Less than 180 days. Well, within each one of these, I've got all these different, you can't see this part as well. Sorry, it's working backwards off my own screen here. But this is going to be each thing. So this is eviction. This is going to be pre-list services. This would be valuation, right? Market and escrow. So they're going to look at each of these and they're going to say, okay, where are we experiencing the most pain? Because our service level agreement and our KPI is based on this days in inventory, let's say under 180 days is their goal. They would want to know each process, how much time they're taking, what the current portfolio looks like, and where they've been historically so they can make changes, okay? Age percentage, this is a really good one. Age percentage is just simply the number of assets that are over a certain amount of, and it's typically days in inventory, but you'll see it as a days on market too, okay? So like DII, days in inventory may be anything greater than 240 days, but days on market may be anything greater than 90 days, all right? So you may see two different measurements for aged, and you may see a couple different things. So you want to see percentage of assets, and then also number of assets that are aged in each category. So again, that number is very subjective. That's going to depend on your outsourcer, but understand that aged is a very horrible thing for the asset managers, because they're going to go through an aged meeting once a week. This aged number is more of a focus than net X. Like there's a ton of talk and a ton of frustration, a ton of headaches around aged percentage. So understand what your measurements are, and definitely understand which of your assets are aged. And then as we talk about in ways to get your foot in the door and grow your business, man, if I'm out and I'm hungry, that's my target. I would know every single asset on my MLS that was getting close to this number. I would actually know anything that was greater than 30 days. Because at 30 days, I'm starting to make price reductions, or at 30 days, the asset manager started to make price reductions. So this is when you can swoop in, and say, hey, look, let me come bird dog this. I'm going to take this for you, and I'm going to run it through. I'll get you a good value, and I'll get under contract in the next 30 days, okay? So that you can get it before they get to their aged. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. And then the very last one, we went over net recovery, but what I wanted to stress on this one, there's going to be variations, okay? So I gave you the big one where I said, okay, net recovery for them was the sales price minus the concessions plus the cost divided by the initial value. That's one way to look at it. Another would be initial list price by sales price, right? So if I list at 100, that's my list, 100,000, and my sale price, SP, is 95,000. My net X, 95%. Okay? Does that make sense? Everybody get that? I listed at 100,000. My sales price was 95,000. Net X is 95%. Now, where this comes in is I could say, okay, so this is why it's so important that we don't take price reductions. Okay? Why we try to sell the asset within 30 days, really. This is my initial list price. My initial. So it's been 30 days on the market. I haven't been able to sell this asset. The asset manager comes in. We do a price reduction based off a new monthly marketing report. And we say, hey, you know what? Our new list price, so this is initial list price. You would also see that as original list price, right? OLP. But now I want to do my current list price. So I'm going to say my current is 90,000. Okay? So now I'm listed at 90,000. An offer comes in at 85. This is my offer. This is my finest sales price, SP. Okay. Break out my calculator. It doesn't. When we're doing it based off initial list price to sales price, that's only an 85% net X. Okay. Because I'm going off my initial list price. That's why once you get past 30 days on the market, it's really hard to recover that. because I would need somebody to come in over that. Like if I was listed at 90, I would need somebody to come in at 95,000 to save my net X and get back to 95, right? So in this scenario, if I ran out at 85, my net X, like it looks higher on this. It's 85% total. But you didn't think you'd be watching me do this. So if I looked at on this, I would say, well, my net X was 94% because I sold it for 85,000 and I was listed at 90. But that's not how they're going to look at it. Okay, they're going to look at your 85,000 against your initial list price. And most stuff is always going to run off initial list price, because if you miss that mark right up front, that's what they want to know. Like, how well did you value this asset? Okay. So some are going to go, and this is on disputes, and there's another section for this, but I also want to point this out. There are some KPIs, like they may have listed at 100 and you came in and you said 90. So let's say that the asset manager said 100,000 is where we need to list this, but you had said 90 the whole time. There are some metrics where they say, what is our final sales price divided against your value? And in that point, you would be at 94%. Okay. So I know that can be a little tricky, especially when I'm drawing it sideways and taking big breaks to get my phone out to do calculations, but they are going to specify that. And that's why you need to understand what your service level agreement is and how your metrics are calculated. Okay. Because a lot of times they will run it off your numbers to see where your performance is. All right. Now, as we get more into the subjective, and it was always very funny to me that outsourcers actually allow these to even exist, but they do, right? Like at VRM, there are a handful of KPIs that are incredibly subjective, and that's what I put up here, where the outsourcer doesn't really have any control unless they looked at every single asset every single day. They wouldn't know whether or not they were being hosed, right? So number one is access issues, right? Like, where's that lockbox located? Was it set to the right code? Was there a key in it? Safe, sound, and secure. Like, was the property secure? Were the doors locked? Was the fence or the gate secure? Was the pool covered? Were the windows closed? Were broken windows boarded? Was the door boarded? Like, all these things that, especially that access one. Like, was there a key in the lockbox? I don't know. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't, right? Doors, windows, secure. Lawn care and landscaping. Like, unless you're actually out there measuring, right? And I've never seen an outsourcer that has said specifically the lawn needs to be cut to a certain length. Now, I've seen it with like local ordinances where they say if it's over 6 inches, then you're going to get a violation. But for the most part, outsourcers aren't going to have that. So they're going to go out and take a picture of the property and say, was the property up to the standards, to our standards? Well, that's very subjective. So you're going to keep that lawn in the best shape possible at all times. And that's going to be part of our systems that we're going to go through, where you're going to actually do your weekly milk run to make sure the properties are being maintained okay. And then performance, just where we're saying like rate someone's performance that's non-subjective. So, kiss ass, be nice to everybody to get a good score there, I guess. Now, we've talked about this. We're not gonna spend a ton of time here because we have talked about it, but KPIs impact the outsourcer because they are going to be awarded flow or taken off of flow. Like, sometimes they'll be cut off for 30 days based on their performance, based on where their KPIs are. Like, if the client keeps setting the KPIs up here and the outsourcer keeps delivering down here, they're going to lose some business. They may lose the entire account, or most likely they just receive less assets coming in, and the person that's performing, or the outsourcer that's performing, is going to get more assets, okay? Now, the same thing works for you, that if you're not performing, you're going to get cut off. You're going to have your inventory slowed down, or you may be removed from the system completely. But if you're performing well, you may get first shot at everything that comes up in that area, okay? For the outsourcers, definitely financial incentives and disincentives. So a lot of people will look at KPIs and they think, okay, you didn't make it, no big deal. There are incentives tied to these KPIs where if an asset manager, if an outsourcer doesn't perform, they may actually have to stroke a check to the client. And I've seen that happen. If they failed, they may have to write and these are significant checks, $25,000 up to $150,000. So it works both ways. Like they're gambling to get an incentive every quarter or semi-annually or whatever it is for them based on these KPIs, but they're also saying if I don't perform, I'm going to reimburse you out some of the money that you've paid me because I didn't live up to my expectations, okay? Now, I haven't seen it where an outsourcer has come back to the agent and said if you don't hit your metrics, then you're going to pay us, but there's other ways that they may penalize you. Like if they're failing safe, sound, and secure, they may not reimburse your, like if you had the grass cut or if you did some kind of rekey or work you had to do the property to secure it or a cleaning or something like that, they may not reimburse it because they said, hey, look, you didn't do it right, we got fined, or they may pass a fine on to you. That's probably a better example. But then also, once an outsourcer has these KPIs and they've got this scorecard and they've got this verification and validation for their performance, then they're definitely going to bring that up whenever they try to go get new business. And outsourcers are constantly trying to get more business, just like you, right? Like VRM doesn't just hang their hat on the VA account. They have a whole team of people that is out pitching and submitting new bids constantly to get new business, okay? So they're going to leverage that when they're bidding and trying to get new business. I already talked about this. KPIs are going to impact you because really the standard for the outsourcer becomes the standard for you. And if an outsourcer is failing in one area, like if their days on market is taking a hit, they're going to pull up their whole portfolio and they're going to see who the worst offenders are with days on market, like who has the assets with the highest days on market, and then also who has the highest days on market as an average, okay? So that's why it's important for you to understand this, is because if they're failing, they're going to come look at you, not look at you, but they're going to look at the areas where they're failing, and you don't want to be an agent that's in that area, okay? And then we talked about it. Well, I mentioned it briefly, broker scorecard. I have seen a ton of negative feedback on the broker scorecard, and it's all justified. In the beginning, broker scorecards were rolled out before the outsourcers really even took the time to understand what they were measuring and to make sure what they were measuring was consistent and accurate, right? And that's how you have some changes. Like initially, it used to be like your net X would be initial list price to sales price, and then everybody started throwing a fit because they had suggested a lower price. And so now the outsourcers would say, okay, well, yours is going to be measured on your BPO as is value against the sales price. Okay, so when they first rolled it out, it was a total mess, but through working with brokers and agents and getting some feedback, the outsourcers are starting to dial in their cards a little more. So I'm going to show you one, but I want to go over something very, very important. Don't panic, right? Like, I get it. The number one thing I heard is this is my business. This is hurting my business. But if you don't understand the scorecard and the outsourcer doesn't understand the scorecard, it's not impacting you. And if you're tracking your numbers, you can dispute any information they give you, okay? So that's why I say don't panic, right? They're evolving. A lot of times they're inaccurate. And a lot of times there's comments that say, hey, yeah, we're using scorecards. And if you're not scoring, you're not going to perform. But at the end of the day, they're still not using those because the outsourcers know that they're not really dependable. And I've ran into that where I would go look at an agent's performance, and yeah, they were like top of the food chain. They were the best performing agent we ever had in the whole history of REO, but they'd only sold one asset. So I only had one asset to go on. Whereas the guy down the street had done 50 and was slightly behind, right? Like what's the right number of assets, or what's the right barometer before I start measuring and saying this is how it's going to be? So you're going to see that as they're kind of evolving their process and fine-tuning it. Don't panic, right? Just keep digging in, keep doing good work, keep grinding every day. And then if you run into a scenario that's completely off the wall, call me. Send me an email. Let's take a look at it and let's figure out a way to get through your broker scorecard. But for the most part, just do the best that you can, measure it, track it, and just keep grinding every single day, okay? Now, as promised, I do want to walk through one. So this is a Bank of America example. This is where the agent's name would have been, but I took the agent's name out just so that I've got no liability for this, right? But here's a Bank of America scorecard. So let's walk through this. So it's going to tell you where we're at. We're in California. We reviewed it May through July of 2012, and this agent scored 100%. So there were 70 possible points. They grabbed all 70 of them. Now, I do want to admit to you, there's one area here that I don't know, and I apologize for that. But everything else we can walk through just fine. So take a look at this here. Sales price to BPO. Okay, so that's exactly what we had said. They're just saying they're not taking out closing costs. They're not taking out any of that stuff. They're just saying, what did it sell for and what was your BPO value? What was the agent's BPO value on this one, okay? So they went through it and they looked at these 3 assets, okay? They looked at those 3 assets, and that's where they're saying that we looked at 3 assets. The broker's average sale price to BPO was 99%. What Bank of America is saying that we want our average to be 100. We will tolerate down to 85 and up to 115. Now, this brings up a very interesting point, guys. If you are over 115, you're penalized, okay? And I've seen that number a little tighter. I've seen it at 105. You're penalized because what they're saying is you priced the property too low. This number, this sales price, is not an indicator of how fast you can sell a property. It's how well do you know your market and how well do you put a value together. So what they're saying is, hey, we're understanding that like a $50,000 asset that sells for cash is probably going to sell above list. But if it sells too high above list, then you left money on the table and you undervalued the property for a quick sale, okay? That's why when you go through the BPO training, you'll see that one of the worst things in the world for me is an REO adjustment. I've seen a bunch of idiot agents put REO adjustment on their BPO that says like, hey, because it's an REO, I'm taking a 10% reduction. Stupidest thing you can do, like value the home for what it is, right? Value it in the market. Total soapbox thing, I apologize. But so what they're saying is this is their tolerance. This is what they would allow. 25 points were possible. They earned 25 because their average was 99%. It was right in where they wanted to be, okay? Then we're going to go over here, and it shows you this little indicator down here that if they had fallen below, like if they were at, I don't know, if they were at like 90, 80%, they would have fallen into this category and they would have been in the yellow and had less points, but I don't know what less points they would have got, okay? I don't know why that's doing that. Totally inopportune time to do that, but what are you going to do? Okay, so the next thing they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, so that's our sale metrics, and now let's look at our timelines, right? List date to accepted offer. That's their measurement. So I don't know how they would do that. I don't know what kind of acronym or abbreviation they would have for that, but that's a Bank of America thing. So if I was a Bank of America listing agent, this is what I would track through Excel. My list date to accepted offer, and that's just very simple, right? Here's my list date. Let's say it was January 1st, 2017. Here's my accepted offer date. Is Valentine's Day. Somebody got a new house on Valentine's Day. You can figure this out. The program that you would write is just equals sum of this cell, right? Minus this cell. That would give you your days, right? And I'll show you, we've got some Excel stuff we'll do on systems. But that's a simple one. So if I know Bank of America is tracking this, then that's exactly what I'm running in my whole Excel spreadsheet I'm keeping in my assets. I want to know where I'm performing and where I'm not, okay? So list date to accepted offer, the broker's averaging 31 days. They're saying we want to see it within 35. We'll accept 35 to 50 days, but the broker came in lower than what the goal was, so they scored all the points. Vacant to secure, they're saying NA, and I don't know why they're saying NA. So vacant would be the date that you reported the asset vacant. They could do it as the date that the eviction attorney reported it vacant, but because there's such a subjective amount there, right? Like if the eviction attorney does the lockout, you would have to have a lockout on every single asset in order to count that as your vacant date. So most likely what that's going to be is the date that the agent reported the property back as vacant. Because remember, when you go out, you're going to do your occupancy inspection and you're going to report back whether it's vacant or not. If you report it as occupied, it's going to go through the eviction process, the cash for keys, all that. Once the eviction, the cash for keys is done or the lockout is done, you're going to be tasked again with a new occupancy inspection. And then in the occupancy inspection, you're going to indicate that it's vacant. That's the vacant day that they're talking about, okay? And then vacant to secure, they may have this as an NA because this may be, Bank of America is big enough that they have their own vendors for personal or for initial services. So this could be something that the vendor's being scored on. But it would be the date that the lockout was completed back would be one, or not the lockout, the rekey was reported back, or the day that initial services were verified as complete would be the secure date. So again, you've got to understand what each metric is, right? Like what their measurements are. And then BPO order to receive, this is just a task. They've worded it a little different. This would just be task completion timeline, right? So like they're saying of these 3 assets, the broker completed the BPO within 2 days. Their goal was 3 days. They would allow up to 5 days, right? I don't know what this BAC pre-qualification rate is. And then here's some of your subjective stuff. Okay, billing accuracy and timelines. I don't know what that VPR is because I haven't worked with Bank of America. Percentage of equator tasks completed. And it's not saying what the school, like, it's not saying the timelines. It's not saying anything like that. It's just saying whatever they consider as compliant. That's a frustrating part of this scorecard. And that's where you would have a conversation with your vendor manager, not the asset manager, and just understand it. Not as a griping, complaining, but just as a pure, authentic, trying to understand the metrics so that you can meet them, so you can help them look better and perform better and get more business, okay? Master listing agreement compliance, that would just be like making sure the E&O insurance was updated, that none of the docs had expired or anything like that. Customer sensitive and non-public personal information audits. That's somebody internally auditing to see what your messages are like. So it's just a big crapshoot, right? Like it's a hit and miss. Whatever ones they looked at just happened to pass. So these are very measurable and then subjective because they may not be looking at everything and you don't know what some of the measurements are. Okay, but that's how Bank of America is running this scorecard. Very straightforward with the exception of these compliant and non-compliance. Now, most likely what you would see is that if this was a non-compliant, you would actually have comments here to support it. Okay? All right. Now, let's wrap this up and just say, okay, so what should you do? Well, if you haven't gotten it by now, we're just going to be as blunt as possible. Understand your KPIs. You've got to know what the asset man or what the, I keep calling the asset manager, what is the outsourcer looking for? Like what are their KPIs for their client and what are your KPIs? Not only what are they, but how are they being measured and how can you dispute them? How often do they come out? Who's scrubbing the information? Who do you report back to? Who do you escalate to, right? Like all that stuff. And then you've got to start tracking your own. Now, this was one of my claim to fames. Like I figured out for Green River what the KPIs were for Chase when we were on that account, when we were on the Chase and EMC account. So as a sales manager, I put together an Excel spreadsheet that tracked all of our KPIs, and it showed where we were tracking for the month and where we performed against the same time last month. And because of that, we were able to stay ahead and see when we needed to push more on the age stuff or push more on whatever metric it was that we were falling behind on. So we never had a surprise at the end of the month when the KPIs came out. You shouldn't be surprised either, okay? So that's going to be kind of in our systems, our offline systems, just some basic Excel things. But these are also things that you're going to have to take it upon yourself to maybe take some Excel classes or to take some Access classes or something like that so that you're learning how to write some formulas that will help your life. So I'll give you some basic ones. I'll give you some basic training. But, you know, if there's a way, if we don't cover a way for you to track, then, you know, first and foremost, I'm always here to help. But I also want you to take some initiative and find ways to understand how to do some of these KPIs yourself so that you can help yourself. You know what I'm saying? So, all right. And then just improve areas where you're behind the curve. That's the most important thing that you can do, right? Like if you're missing your BPO, get better at BPOs. If your values on BPOs is not working, get better at it. If you're taking too long on the market, try to figure out why. Maybe you can do more open houses or do more flyers or do some just listed flyers or have a bigger pool of investors. Like how can you, now that you're measuring, now how can you go in and improve and just keep improving so that you become dominant in your space, okay? So once again, I really appreciate your time and attention. I appreciate you going through this with me. This is going to help you out a ton as you build your business. So if you have questions, comments, concerns, anything you're stuck on, you know, hit me up. Let's walk through these so that you can, like I said, just so you can go dominate your space. All right? I really appreciate you. Thanks.